For most of us, our understanding of the mafia starts and ends with Hollywood. From the Godfather to Goodfellas to the Sopranos, there's a certain romantic appeal surrounding mafia men who rise from nothing to form long lines of dons and crime families. It's all about money, power, and a somewhat contradictory code of honor. But the true story of the mafia is much more complex, a picture painted with shades of violence, loyalty, and a hint of bootlegging. Its origins span centuries and cross continents, from the sun-soaked hills of Sicily to the busy streets of New York City. Today, we'll take a seat at the table with the history of the five families, the real-life story of the Godfather. The mafia's Hollywood portrayal often leans heavily on the glamorization of mobsters, but in truth, the mafia's power was rooted in control, intimidation, and fear. The mafia men depicted in popular media often carry a sense of honor and invincibility, but in reality, their rise was far from romantic. It was an era steeped in violence, betrayal, and constant power struggles. The true story of the mafia holds much darker elements than the shiny veneer Hollywood presents. In Sicily's picturesque lands, a group of men decided they'd had enough of the local government's arrogance. These men felt oppressed by a corrupt system, and they took matters into their own hands. They formed groups with the purpose of protecting their communities from those in power. At first, these groups may have seemed like noble protectors, but as time went on, the true nature of these men revealed itself: coercion, extortion, and violence. By the mid-1800s, these loosely connected groups expanded and merged, eventually becoming the powerful and well-organized Sicilian Mafia. Sicilian society at the time was ruled by corruption, and the Mafia capitalized on this by offering their protection in exchange for loyalty and money. But the Mafia's protection wasn't as benevolent as it sounded. These groups used fear as their currency, imposing their own rules and laws on communities that were too afraid to resist. This would mark the beginning of the Mafia's long-standing influence in Sicily and eventually in America. The Sicilian Mafia didn't just fight the corrupt government, they became part of the very fabric of that corruption. As the Sicilian Mafia grew stronger, another crime syndicate began to make its mark in Naples: the Kamora. Born out of prison cells and shadows, the Kamora was an organization just as ruthless and dangerous as the Sicilian Mafia, but with its own distinct structure and methods. It was only a matter of time before the Kamora, seeking to expand its influence, made its way to America, where the two mafias would eventually collide. The Kamora wasn't just interested in traditional forms of crime. It also became known for its control over illicit trades like counterfeit goods and later drug trafficking. Their arrival in the United States added a new layer of complexity to New York's criminal underworld. While the Sicilians settled in Harlem and Manhattan, the Neapolitans, with their Kamora roots, gravitated toward Brooklyn. What began as separate criminal factions would soon evolve into a fierce rivalry, with both sides determined to carve out their own slice of power and control in the new world. Fast forward a few decades, and many Italians, including Neapolitans and Sicilians, arrived in New York City, settling in different boroughs. The Sicilian Mafia found its home in Harlem and Manhattan, while the Kamora began making moves in Brooklyn. Their criminal ventures soon collided, leading to what would later become known as the First Mafia War. The Mafia, known for its loyalty and secrecy, had an extensive network of informants and operatives. Tensions between the Sicilian and Neapolitan factions escalated, eventually culminating in a bloody battle for control. The war between these factions wasn't merely about territory. It was about proving who was the dominant force in New York's underworld. The war was brutal, with both sides vying for supremacy. However, one Sicilian don, Polino Morano, would set a trap that changed the course of the war. He lured the Camora's Nicholas Mel to a supposed peace meeting, only to have him and his guards executed. This moment marked the end of the Camora's reign in New York and the rise of the Sicilian Mafia as the dominant force. Amidst the chaos and violence of the First Mafia War, Joe the Boss Mascia rose to prominence. Mascia had been involved in crime most of his life in Italy, eventually fleeing Sicily after being charged with murder. He landed in New York in 1903 and joined the notorious Morello gang, which was one of the city's first major crime families. Mafia's rise to power wasn't easy. He faced countless attempts on his life, but through sheer force and cunning, he quickly emerged as one of the top figures in the city's criminal underworld. By the early 1920s, he had survived numerous assassination attempts and earned the nickname, the man who could dodge bullets. Mafia's true power came when he managed to take control of the Morello gang after Salvatore was eliminated in 1928 with help from his ally Charles "Lucky" Luciano. However, becoming the boss didn't mean he had reached the top of the pyramid. Mafia now faced the challenge of dealing with another powerful newcomer, Salvatore Marenzano. Salvatore Marenzano was sent to the United States by his boss, Don Vito Ferro, with the mission to expand the Sicilian Mafia's influence. Marenzano quickly established himself as a powerful figure in the New York underworld, setting up lucrative businesses in real estate and bootlegging, all while gathering a loyal following among fellow Sicilians. His rise threatened Mafia's control over the Morello gang, and the two soon found themselves in a brutal battle for dominance. Marenzano's rise led to what would be known as the infamous Calamari War. The conflict was not just a typical mafia skirmish, it was a full-scale war for control over New York's criminal empire. Initially, Luciano and Vito Genovese had supported Mafia, but as Marenzano's power grew, they realized the tides were shifting. Luciano, seeing that the winds were changing, brokered a deal with Marenzano, which ultimately led to Mafia's death in 1931. Marenzano's victory set the stage for him to reshape New York's criminal landscape. After Marenzano's death in 1931, Luciano abolished the title of Boss of all Bosses and introduced a new system, the Commission. This governing body would oversee the operations of all 5 mafia families, Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, creating an organized structure that would last for decades. The Commission was essentially the mafia's version of a global governing body, ensuring that disputes between families were resolved without open warfare, as much as possible. This shift in power allowed the 5 families to consolidate their operations, growing their criminal enterprises across the United States. But despite their vast control, the families faced increasing internal turmoil, law enforcement crackdowns, and shifting political landscapes. As the decades passed, the mafia's grip on the criminal world began to loosen. By the end of the 20th century, the once powerful families saw their influence diminish, but their legacy remains ingrained in American history. Their tale of ambition, power, and violence continues to fascinate, which is why we still make movies about them today. So what do you think? What would your gangster nickname be? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our channel.